Everybody, thanks for tuning in. So that was the if you hopefully you heard the lecture playing with the song. That's from the lecture, The Coin of Heaven. Last week we did a chapter from Awakened Imagination called The Coin of Heaven. They're not the same, but same message, probably a lot of the same verbiage. And it left off with the phrase, the thing that his wife realized either while she was taking a nap or meditating or something, that she told Neville, which is that every thought, stop wasting your thoughts. They're the coin of heaven. It should be an investment. And then I guess related to what I know of the news today, I would, let everybody know, remind you, there's always going to be distractions in your personal life and in the world at large. Things that try to pull you away from the only thing which matters, which is remembering that you have the divine prerogative to decide what your life is like. So to start off the first couple streams I'm doing are going to be about mental diet. We did Coin of Heaven last week. This week we're doing Your Conversations Aright. Next week, I don't know if or Saturday rather, I either will do one more mental diet lecture or we'll move straight into the 12 disciples. I haven't decided yet. Either way, you can download the mental diet compilation that a friend of mine, Naomi, was so awesome to put together. Just exclamation mark mental diet, and that will pop up the link to download it, so you can reference those, read those anytime you want. Those are the essential mental diet lectures, because when it came to advising you how to create your reality, Neville talked about a couple things, So he talked about a specific type of imaginal activity where you're visualizing in a very relaxed state, in the state akin to sleep, which a lot of people abbreviate as SATS. But Neville also talked about your thoughts throughout the day, which are actively creating the state in which you abide and the consciousness with which you consent. And those are generally called, like that whole aspect of mind, Neville will call mental diet. So that's what these first couple of lectures are about, or the first few topics I'm going to discuss on the stream are about, because everybody's thinking all the time anyway. You're always thinking something. But are you thinking about something you really want to experience, or are you thinking about something that makes you feel bad? Either because it berates you personally, or because it's something that causes you anxiety. I kind of think it's false advertisement to call the news when it's, like 99% bad news. But you can't just call it bad news, can you? So I'll probably just go straight into the lecture. Though I'll remind, if anybody hasn't done them yet who watched last week, I gave 2 exercises at the end of last stream. One was the absolutist method, which was to pick a divine ideal, so joy, freedom, love, happiness, prosperity, whatever, and feel into that. Be meditative for about 15 minutes. Feel into that. Feel really strongly into that. And then if you wanted, you could sort of attach it to different areas of your life. So let's say you wanted to feel the sense of freedom, like so immensely that is only what you feel and think is just freedom, and you could just say freedom, freedom, and feel into it. And then you might take that feeling and assign it to my money, how much money I know I have, my sense of how I feel in relationships. I feel so much freedom to express myself in my relationships. Or my career, how much support I feel from my coworkers and colleagues. I feel so much freedom to be creative. If you wanted, you could also just spend the time in that, really feeling into that one thing, and then see how it impacts your reality over the next few days. The other exercise was to identify one less than ideal thought and its replacement. I'll give today's exercise at the end of the stream, but those were the 2. If you wanted to do those, you could do those anytime. And the absolutist method, I've had a lot of success with it. I really want to start doing it more, because you can use that to consciously create like a default dominant state that your whole reality is coming from, and is sort of projecting out of that one thing. Like you can pick bliss, you can pick calm, you can pick peace, and see that theme reverberate and present itself in every aspect of your life. Okay, so today's Order Your Conversations Aright. Let's just go straight into it because I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to do lectures. This will be my first time reading out one of the lectures. Last time was a chapter of a book. It was a pretty short chapter, so it didn't take too long. I thought that stream would be like 2 hours. It was only like an hour and a half. Today might be a little longer because when Neville delivered these lectures, they would be 50 minutes. But I'm going to pause every now and then and maybe discuss what he's talking about. Firstly, before I even start reading it, so this it's on the other computer. Order Your Conversations Aright comes from the Bible, of course. It comes from Psalms, and I just have to pull it up because it's on my other computer. Psalm chapter 50, verse 23. Let me see. Let me get a version of it that's a little bit more contemporary. Whoever offers the sacrifice of thanksgiving glorifies me and prepares his way so that I will show God's salvation to him. That's the World English Bible of the King James Version. Whoso offereth praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright, I will show the salvation of God. There was also a really cool interpretation of this psalm. Oh man, it's under commentaries. I can find it. It was by a Church of England reverend who has been passed. He died in like 1826 or something. I think this is the one. Matthew Poole. Let me check that that's the right guy, because I read some of the commentaries on it to make sure. English theologian. No, this is a different guy. Let me see if I can find the right one. No, that's not it. No. Let me switch to my other monitor. It's a worthwhile commentary to pull it up and get a hold of it. Hugh Stowell. Hugh, and then Stowell, the last name, Stowell. A man cannot order his conversation aright who does not seek and wait for the salvation of God. By the salvation of God, we understand man's deliverance from sin and death and condemnation through the great work of the atonement wrought by the Lord Jesus Christ. The man does not seek the salvation of God who does not seek it in ordering his conversation aright. A man who sets about it earnestly, doing the will of God as far as he sees it, does not rest in that. He still looks to Christ. He still looks for God's quickening spirit to give life to his obedience, and that man is ordering his conversation aright. The Word of God warrants us, and the experience of God's children in all ages warrants us, and saying, as he has not said, seek ye his in vain, so no man that seeks honestly to order his conversation aright shall fail to have shown to him sooner or later the salvation of God. Now, so if you're not familiar yet with Neville, you're going to have a different understanding of a lot of those words. Because when we're talking about salvation in the Neville sense, we're not talking about some like magical religious moment. We're literally just talking about experiencing the reality you prefer. And when we're talking about Christ, we're not talking about a figure that lived thousands of years, that may or may not have lived thousands of years ago or lived thousands of years ago, who performed like parlor tricks and called them miracles. We're talking about you. We're talking about your consciousness. You are Jesus. You are Christ. Every time you so strongly identify with something, you crucify that state in your mind, and it will resurrect in your outer world. So if you want to experience something different than what you're experiencing now, which would be salvation, you would need to fix your mind, your consciousness, on what you prefer, and stay true to that. And Order Your Conversation Aright, that specific psalm is talking about the power of thankfulness, giving that praise to God in advance, because you know for a fact that as long as you are staying faithful to the state you've chosen to crucify, it will express in your outer world. So the only thing you should be doing is to be happy about it and to be thankful that that is definitely going to come. I mean, it's just one of these things where until you've listened to enough of Neville's view of the Bible, and started having experiences yourself, it's still going to seem like, what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with my life? Like, like especially someone who's not religious, or who moved away from religion, or who is so deep into the religion that you have a different understanding of these words, it's going to seem irrelevant. But hopefully this lecture might help move your mind in that direction, where you have a different understanding of it, where you can appreciate that, the Bible is essentially an instruction manual. It's little notes you left yourself. It's your own diary that you wrote to give yourself some guidance as you move through all these various states and experiences, and give you some way to sort of guide and direct what you'd like to experience next, where you'd like to go next. Okay, so I don't know what year this lecture was from, if it was an earlier one or a later one, but you can certainly Google that, check that out, look that up. Tonight's subject is Order Your Conversations Aright. As we are told in the 50th Psalm, to him that ordereth his conversation aright, I will show the salvation of God. Have we any instructions in Scripture concerning how we order our conversations aright? We do have it in the 4th chapter of Ephesians. We are told, put off your old nature, which belongs to your former conversations, and put on the new nature. Except for the word conversations, which occurs only in the King James Version. If the old nature belongs to the former conversations, then the new nature has to have new conversations. Put on the new nature, created after an image of God. If you've been broke, you can't keep thinking thoughts about how you never have enough money. You need to move into thoughts of, I always have more than enough, I have so much money coming in. Just to give a quick example. Well, now, what is this nature? Nature is that principle upon which we depend for sameness of form in transmitted life. If my conversations determine the things that project themselves upon the screen of space in my world, until I change my conversations, I cannot change the forms. For that is the principle upon which man depends for the sameness of forms in transmitted life. If these forms that come out, good, bad, or indifferent, are the results of my conversations, I must change my conversations. We are told in an ancient book, a book written in the 1st century. I have a translation by Walter Scott. It is called the Hermetica, and in it is said, God has given 2 gifts to man alone, to no other mortal creature. The gifts are mind and speech, and these gifts, if used rightly, will differ in nothing from the immortals. Now when man takes off the body, when he quits the body, they will be his guides, and by them he will be led into the troop of the gods, and into the souls of those who attain to bliss. And when I was talking about here about the gift of mind and speech, that was also the little audio clip I started at the beginning of the stream. He had just finished talking about how when he says mind, he often is using that as a synonym for imagination. As something to help you understand the vocabulary that Neville tends to use. Only to man is the gift given of mind and speech. I could tell you the story of how easy it is to do, but in the doing, may I tell you, it really is difficult. You will think, why, certainly I can change my conversations and then remain faithful to the change. But we are such creatures of habit. And I have definitely noticed that. I mean, especially when you pick something that is coming up in your thoughts throughout the day, it is so easy to let little thoughts creep in that and get so identified with them and get so enamored with them that you forget where you wanted to go instead. So the idea of mental diet is to be vigilant of that. So Shakespeare could say in The Merchant of Venice, where he put the words into the mouth of Portia, "If to do were as easy as to know what were good to do, then chapels had been churches, and poor men's cottages princes' palaces. It is a good divine that follows his own instructions. I can easier teach 20 what were good to be done than to be one of the 20 to follow my own teaching." It's quite true. It's a lot easier for me to sit here reading this lecture out to you than it is for me to shift my own thoughts. Now, that said, there is a state where it's incredibly easy for me to do that, and I've felt over the past 2 years that it gets easier and easier. And the more you focus on the things you want and already having them, and the more you are consciously shifting your thoughts and rehearsing those and repeating those, it does get easier. They do start to take over, and you can feel like this tipping point happening in your mind. It's really cool. So it's simple on the surface, but in practice, it is not as simple as it appears to be. But if man could only take an inner conversation and control it, a conversation which implies the fulfillment of his dream, and remain faithful to that inner conversation, this inner dialogue, a controlled inner dialogue, possibly could be the most fruitful conversation in your life. So not only here is he talking about your thoughts, but he's also talking about something I know I do, that I would guess a lot of people do, though not everyone, which is a lot of times you're talking to other people in your head. You're imagining conversations with them, and you're telling them about your life. So when you're doing that, instead of telling them all about your problems or about the things you want that you don't have yet, instead go to, okay, well, if I already had the job I want, how would I tell my best friend? If I had a ton of money coming in, what would that conversation be like with my mom? Practically. Like, you're having these conversations anyway. And when you notice that your mind is doing that, don't stay stuck on whatever the problem is. Go into, I've already got this. This is already done. I don't need to worry about this anymore. And it happened better than I ever thought it would. And talk to that person from that perspective. Man talks all day long inwardly. He may restrain the impulse to say it outwardly. He may feel like saying it, but he is cultivated. He is an educated person. He feels himself under restraint. He might feel like telling you to go to the devil, but he restrains the impulse to say it audibly. But he has said it. It was born with the impulse. Now there, Neville's talking about cursing people out in your head, which he obviously advises don't do. If I could only now take my objective in this world and dare to assume I've achieved it, and then carry on conversations, inner conversations, from the premise of that assumption, I should put this to the test and prove it. Would it really achieve a change of form in my world? I am telling you from my own experience, it does. It absolutely does. I can tell you from my personal experience, it does too. But sometimes you get so enamored with what is that even those conversations keep replicating in your head, and you don't always catch them. But if you just stop doing that nonsense, and move into mentally, it's already done, and talking to people mentally from that perspective, wow, things can really shift in incredible ways. As we are told in Isaiah, the 55th chapter, "And the word that goes forth from my mouth shall not return unto me void. It must accomplish that which I purpose, and prosper in the thing for which I sent it." But you will say, this is the Lord speaking, and certainly the Lord can do that. Well, now let me quote the last words of David as said in the 23rd chapter of 2 Samuel, and these are the last two words of David. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, his word upon my tongue." The Spirit of the Lord, he never had that revelation until the moment. He realizes now that all along everything on his tongue was the Lord speaking. This is Neville's elaborate way of talking about the fact that you and God the Father are one entity, so all your thoughts are actually God's thoughts. The Lord speaks by me, and his word is upon my tongue. The word Lord, as you were told earlier in this series, if it in any way conveys the sense of an external something, external to your own being, you have the wrong Lord. If the words Jesus Christ convey the same sense of an existent something outside of man, you have the wrong Jesus Christ. For Jesus Christ is in us. And if he is in us, and by him all things are made, and without him was not anything that is made, and he is called the Word of God, and you understand that the very Word was created by the Word of God, and David tells us that God is upon his tongue, the very Word of God is upon his tongue, then we are told, I am the Lord, there is no other God. Beside me, there is no God. Now, I kind of think like this whole paragraph is like is like one of Neville's rants. That's kind of the way he would have like mic dropped it back in the day. But now that verbiage is a little bit, it's not, I don't know, it doesn't have the same impact it used to have, I don't think. Is it true? Well, you and I are called upon to put it to the test. Can I actually now, this very moment, construct a simple conversation which, if it is true, will involve that I realize my objective? Can I then be faithful to that conversation, or will I wander from it? I'm telling you, it's very difficult. It seems so simple. I certainly could take a little conversation between a friend and myself and a dialogue and tell him that things are as I would like them to be, that I have this goal and that goal. And do you realize? I've realized it. It all came so simply and so naturally, it all fell into place. Could you really believe that? Well, the thing is to try it. See how long you can carry on that conversation without wandering away. I've tried it over and over. Every time that I am successful in keeping it to where I demand in words, but again, to quote Shakespeare, it is a great virtue, and the one who can do it, it is a noble virtue to follow your own instruction. So I can teach you. It's easy. Far easier to teach 20 what were good to be done than to be one of the 20 to follow mine own teaching. But now let me share with you a story I know well, the story of my father. He was born a very poor white man on the island of Barbados. My mother was born poor. She had nothing. He had nothing. And they proceeded to have children. 12 children were born. 2 died at birth. 10 survived. He had nothing. How he got hold of this, I do not know, but the first time he heard me speak in New York City was a Sunday morning. And we went back to the apartment, and he said, you know, everything you said this morning is true. But why do you tell people to close their eyes? Don't close your eyes. Keep them partly shut. You can control your imagination, and you can control your attention better if the eyes are not completely closed. When you see me in the morning after breakfast, reclining in my chair, you might think I'm just sleeping it off because he's a heavy drinker. You might think I'm simply sleeping it off. I'm not sleeping off anything. I'm doing my day's work then. I bring before my mind's eye the men that I want to deal with that day, and I control the conversation. I tell them exactly what I want to tell them as though it were true. I let them tell me, confirm that it is true, and then when I'm completely satisfied with my inner conversation, then I go to town, and it works that way. Now, he started behind the 8 ball. He had himself, my mother, my grandmother, and the 10 of us to feed, plus a few servants. It was not easy, but when he died in 1959, he could leave his 10 children because my mother preceded him by many years, and he never remarried. She died in 41, and he said, no, I've been so blissfully happy with your mother, I could never get married again, so he remained single until he died at the age of 85. But when he died, that poor man could leave a family of 10, independently wealthy, each, not collectively. He gave it to each individually as a block of stock in the company, just to the 10 of us. In 1951, it was then equal to an independent income for each of us. It has tripled since he gave it to us when he died in 1959, under the control of my brother Victor, who practices the same thing. Victor doesn't smoke and he doesn't drink, but he sits alone, and in his room, he too is carrying on his little inner conversations, premises of desires fulfilled, and he can completely control that imagination of his. He can completely control the inner conversation, and things work just as he has determined them. He never goes to church. He's a religious man in the true sense of the word. He gives generously to charity and to all people. You would never know how many people he helps in the island because he doesn't publicize it. That works for him because he has found out inner conversations will do it. So this is cool here because Neville is given really the most personal experience, talking about how his family uses to create their wealth. And Goddard Enterprises, as far as I know, is still in operation on the island of Barbados. That's where Neville was born, though he quickly moved to New York, started his career as a dancer, and then got into lecturing and writing books. But his family, he's talking about them here, how they did it. His brother Victor, who ended up taking over the company, is probably the best example in all the Neville lectures I've listened to of how to do it for wealth. Victor told him that his secret was that he loves people. So he likes having, he's passed now, certainly, but he used to like having people visit him. And so he would enjoy the conversations ahead of time. And he saw business as like a fun thing, something that they could enjoy together, something that had a mutual benefit. So that was his secret to how he was so financially successful. All right, so then we are told, to him who orders his conversations aright, I will show the salvation of God. Then we're told how to do it. Put off your old nature, which belongs to your former conversations, and you know how, day after day, there are certain people who will run the same thing like a record, and do it over and over when you meet them. They just start where they left off last time you talked with them. They tell the same story over and over and over, how rotten she is to me, how rotten he is to me. And after one solid year, when you return, they take up just where they left off before. Oh, I skipped down a little bit. After one solid year, when you return to the city, they take up just where they left off before, and they wonder, why are these things happening to me? Well, here in the greatest book in the world, we are told why. For if my conversation determines my nature is that principle upon which I depend for sameness of forms of transmitted life. How can I change the form when the form is dependent upon my inner conversation? So my inner conversation is actually determining the entire thing, but man thinks it was only some external being called God, whose word would not return to him void, that it had to prosper in the thing for which it was sent. Because he has divorced himself from God, God's name forever and forever and forever is I am. He said, that is my name forever, and by that name I shall be known throughout all generations. Well, before you were given the name John or Mary, you had God's name. God's name is I am. That should precede the name you now use as John. For should I ask you, what is your name? Before you say John, you're going to say I am, and you're going to say I am John. So you preceded the little mass called John and declared that I am. Well, that's God's name. So that is the one spoken of in Scripture, whose word cannot return void, but must accomplish that which he purposed. It must prosper in the thing for which he sent it. You may say, how simple this thing is. You mean, I can start tonight? I don't go to church. I'm not religious. I've done nothing in the world. But do you mean I have that talent? Is this the being of whom Hermes spoke when he said, God gave a gift to man and to no other creature, and this gift is mind and speech. Well, I can talk, and I have a mind. And he tells me that speech reflects mind, and mind reflects God. That is man, so is God. And as is God, so man. And if God reflects my mind, and my mind reflects my speech, to change any production in my world, I've got to change the speech. So it is simply that the mind reflects it, and the mind reflects God. So my God goes back then to my speech. So I am simply reproducing the same old story in my world when I could easily change the record. Now, the thing that is probably going to be, I don't know if people like it or don't like it. I tend to like it. Neville's very repetitive. He says the same thing 50 different ways, and that's the lecture. But the thing is, sometimes you need to hear something 50 different ways to find the way that really connects with you. And I do like when he includes the stories. Right now, he's going to include a story of the wife. Back in 1953, my wife had a vision. It was an audio vision. She jumped out of bed and came into the living room. I always rise early. She came barging through looking for the dictionary, and she said, I've just had the most wonderful experience. I saw nothing, but I heard the most wonderful voice, a voice of authority, and the voice said to me, You must stop spending your thoughts, time, and your money. Everything in your life must be an investment. So let's see. He doesn't say if she was like taking a nap or what. She must have been taking a nap. But this is the one that he ended with in the talk I was playing at the beginning of the stream. She wanted to see the difference between spending and investing. According to the definition in the dictionary she had at the time, when you spend, you give without any hope of return. It's a waste to spend. When you invest, you expect a return on equity. When you invest, you always expect a return on your equity. So you must stop spending, and everything you do from now on must be invested. And it's stated what they are: your thoughts, your time, and your money. These are three things that man thinks he has in abundance, and he is spending them morning, noon, and night. He wastes his time in trivia. He wastes his thoughts. He wastes his money. So if this vision of hers is actually put into practice, and she is the first one to admit that she does not practice it, she was the instrument through which it came, but she would be the first one to admit that, raised as she was in the most conservative environment, that she doesn't really live it because she lives a restrained life. She would think it only becoming a lady to express herself. Well, I would say openly. She feels it, and she knows now that she was thinking of saying it, but she restrained the impulse. She said it anyway. She knows now that her body is an emotional filter, and it bears the marks of her prevalent emotions. So all day long, you and I are making little tiny speech movements are being made in us. We're not hearing them audibly, but the inner ear hears them. So I need not hear them on the outside, and no one need hear them, but I see the results in my world. My whole vast world cannot bear anything other than my speech. I mean, if we're going to summarize the whole freaking, you don't have to read any of the other ones. It just comes down simply to my whole vast world could not bear anything other than my speech. That's what the book teaches. I must put off the old nature. It belongs to my former conversations. And then it tells me, now, put on the new nature. The old nature belongs to my former conversations. The new nature belongs to my new conversations. Can I put on the new and make it so natural that I will do with that as I did with the former one? And can I now so completely change the record and play it often enough that it becomes a habit within me as I walk the earth, so that things are perfect, so that things are easy, so that when I read the headline of a market crash, it doesn't disturb me. So when I read the headline that something has gone to pot, it does not disturb me inwardly. Since this is based upon principle, it doesn't matter what happens in the world, because the world is simply the outpouring of the conversations of men and women in the world. If I change my conversation in the midst of a depression, I am still going to be successful in my world. There are men today that were hugely successful when millions lost so much during the depressed market. And an interesting little factoid here, I haven't read all of the lectures that Neville gave during World War II, but of the ones that I've encountered, Neville doesn't talk about the war. The only mention he makes is of a guy who keeps cursing out FDR when he's shaving in the morning and tells him stop cursing out FDR. Otherwise, he doesn't talk about the war. He's actively lecturing in New York during World War II, and he's not talking about the war. He's talking about all of this. I mean, this might have been one of the ones during the war. I think this is later. If I had to guess, I would say this is one from the 50s. Obviously after, he said here that the wife had the vision in 53, right? Yeah. So this has got to be after that, obviously. But yeah, just a little interesting thought there, especially considering we're told there's so much drama going on today in the outer world. They're not concerned about the market. They don't watch the market at all, but they must be controlling their inner conversation. I know in my father's case, he was a living example. My brother Victor is a living example of this technique. I don't think my father taught it to him. He really got it innately, because he told me that when he saw the sign on the building that had the name P.N. Roach and Company, he made it spell J.N. Goddard and Sons. When he confided to my mother, My mother said, Vic, don't do it. We don't have enough money. It's only going to hurt you. You can never own that building. 2 years later, the building was up for sale. The business that was in it failed. A total stranger came in. When I say total stranger, he knew us only as a family, but he had never come to our home for a cup of tea. We were never entertained in his home for a cup of tea, and he was not a drinking partner of my father. He knew him. The day it went up for his sale, he came in and said he would buy it for us. All he would take as collateral was our signature, for we had invested in it our honesty, and the bank assured him that if we pledged ourselves, we would do it. If we had to starve to pay his note, we would do it. He said, that's all I need. If you sign this piece of paper, I'll buy the building. I will have my lawyer bid for it. If I bid for it, they'll bid me up. But if my lawyer bids for it, he represents more than one client. They don't know who he represents today. They wouldn't think for 1 second that he was a planter, that he would bid for a business on Main Street, which carries groceries. So that day the Goddards owned it, and all we had to do was give our signature on that paper that we signed. And he said to reduce the principal in 10 years. And as you reduce it, you simply pay 6% on the principal. And you keep on reducing it every year. In 10 years, it must be completely paid off. Well, it was. And when he died, 20 years later, he said his greatest friend was Victor Goddard. And he left him an estate in excess of $250,000 tax-free. Everything was completely paid off when he gave it to my brother Victor. He said, you have been my friend. So I know that today, and all this is just from Victor visualizing on the building their name. Eventually they sold the building. Like they ended up selling it to a bank or something. So they made money off the sale of the building too. And I mean, they obviously were paying interest on a loan, but that was income that was coming from the business anyway. They could have been putting that money towards rent. So I know that today we have at least one member of the family who does put this into practice. I try to the best of my ability to practice it because I get requests morning, noon, and night in my mail asking me to hear this, hear that, and hear the other. I never fail to hear it. I try not to dwell upon it after I have heard it. I must believe that which I have heard must come to pass, and is told in the first epistle of John in the fifth chapter, if we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, we know we have obtained the request made of him. What a challenge. If we know that he hears us in whatever we ask, no restraint upon the things we ask for, then we know we have. There's the past tense. We have obtained the request made of him. Read the 5th chapter, 15th verse, first epistle of John. What a fantastic promise to make to man. When he's talking about the past tense there, he's talking about the fact that creation's already finished. So when you are inwardly directing this conversation towards something already having been realized, but you're conscious of this hasn't happened yet, well, it has actually happened. And in that moment when you're having that conversation, you're just experiencing the version of you that's already gone through it, already had the success, and then you will naturally move into that state in time, through the frame of time. But this little paragraph here, I try my best to, my ability to practice it, is a nice little succinct discussion of when you want to manifest for other people. Because, oh my God, did I scrolled down it. Okay, I don't know why I jumped like that. It looks like so he's talking about what his method here, which is that if back in the day he'd get a letter from somebody, he would imagine it that one time and then try not to think about it. Well, that can be difficult, especially if you have someone who is really into telling you their problems all the time. Now, of course, you can assume that they will get out of that state too. They will get out of that complaining state, especially as more of the things you imagine for them start to come to pass. But with some people, it can be quite difficult to persist in hearing that conversation when they keep telling you that the thing they want hasn't happened yet. And you have to keep mentally going ahead to hearing them tell you that it has happened yet. So what he was probably doing was imagining receiving a success letter from them, receiving some further communication. I know people also used to call them on the phone. So whatever that entailed, if he would hear them calling him or read a letter from them, whatever, And then if they ever tried to bring it up again, he would try to just recall that conversation. Again, that's one of those things where in practice, it's a little bit harder than it is said in teaching you how to do it. Okay. I don't have then to keep it going. It's like putting the seed down and having full confidence in the planting of that seed. For it contains within itself the power of self-expression. The Word of God is like the seed of God, and is planted at that moment that you actually carry on the conversation. So I guess there he didn't rehearse, he didn't do them again. Like a lot of times, he's like, I already imagined for you. I don't need to imagine again, and you don't need to tell me that it hasn't happened yet. I don't know. For me, what I tend to like to do, because sometimes if the conversation is like the person is so strongly insistent on the thing not being here yet, I try to remember whatever I had done the first time and play that out again just to remind myself that that's actually the truth and that's actually what they've already experienced. So it helps me de-emphasize whatever they're telling me now about them not having the thing yet. It's like, well, how can you tell me that when I know it's already happened type of deal. So I bring before my mind's eye the one who asked of me if I know them. I do not know them. I imagine that I've heard from them. They will not always confirm it, but I imagine they wrote me and thanked me. Okay, so he says here directly what he did. He imagined letters from the people. As we were told in Scripture, there were 10 who received the gift. They were all lepers. Only one turned back and said thank you. But the 9 went on and they got their help, but they never turned back to say thank you. So it doesn't really matter as far as I'm concerned. I do my work. They may never write to tell me that it worked, but quite often I meet them maybe a year later or 3 or 4 years later, and they will say, you know, so-and-so happened. I ask them, do you know why it happened? Then they give me the means that they were employed and tell me that is why it happened. Mrs. Archibald Roosevelt, who was just killed in an automobile accident in New York City, she would come home once a month. This was always a problem with her family, never her husband, but her children-in-laws. Then one day she said to me, my son has returned from Egypt, and he has an enormous beard, and I am so ashamed to walk down the street with him. Here was this young, good-looking lad. Now, this was before the hippies, when people began to grow long hair and beards. He was unique, so I said, now, Mrs. Roosevelt, you know what a kiss of your son would be like without the beard, don't you? Oh, yes, she said. Well, kiss him, and he doesn't have a beard. Put your arms around him and kiss your son and see the nice, smooth skin and feel it. Well, she said, I'll do it. Well, she never once told me, but because of her position in the world, I read in the morning paper on a Monday morning, here was this big spread of a wedding. He got married on Sunday, a smooth-skinned lad. Mrs. Roosevelt, Archie Roosevelt, the bride, the whole gang of them. When she came the next time, I said, you know, your son has shaved his beard. She said, yes. Do you know why? You know, he married a girl who disliked it. Because she completely disliked it, he shaved it off. I said, so that's why it happens. That's why it happened. Tell me, Mrs. Roosevelt, did you do what I asked you to do? And I reminded her of what I had asked. She said, oh, yes. I did that, but why he did it was the girl. You see, they always go back to the means employed. The girl could have loved him just as much with the beard, but she had to initiate the drive. He shaved it off, and then the mother gave full credit to the girl. That's just talking about how we forget, or we don't want to give credit to our own thoughts. We want to deny our own harvest. I've seen so many things happen, and they never turn back, but forget. We have a very short memory. We do not remember when we set in motion the events, or when we planted the seed. So if nothing comes in this world by accident, it is produced by some principle. And the principle is told in this talk tonight. And the principle is simply our conversation, our little simple inner conversations when we are alone. The conversation when you are putting on a mask and meet someone at a cocktail party and you're all lying. Everybody's lying. You've had a few martinis and this one lies, that one lies. Little do they know what they're doing is a lie. But I don't mean that. I mean when you're alone. Knowing this principle, it doesn't really matter if what appears now to be a lie. You know an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. So now you are going to put that principle into operation. We will take an assumption. I will assume that things are as I want them to be. Now I will carry on a conversation based upon that assumption, and that controlled inner conversation will be possibly my greatest success, my greatest conversation ever, far, far greater than the conversations we hold at a dinner party. Now that said, you could always set one of your imaginal conversations at a party. Like a friend you haven't seen for a while. They want to know what you've been up to, and then you tell them about all the great things you've been up to. You sit down, and here's a dinner. You're not going to tell your host that thing is horrible, are you? But anyway, you wonder what on earth possessed her to make this. But you don't say it because that would be unkind. But you did say it anyway. You said it inwardly. But I'm speaking now of this productive principle. When you are alone and you know exactly what you want for yourself or for a friend or for the community, then what conversation would imply that you have yours, she has hers, and the community has its? Well, carry on with that conversation. If this statement in the 4th chapter of Ephesians is correct, then it should prove itself in the testing that if I could put off my old nature, which refers to my former conversations, just don't put it off because I cannot live in a void, but put on the new nature. If the old is related to my former conversations, well, then my new nature must be related to my new conversation. Well, I will start a new conversation and talk with my brother Victor and tell him of the success I'm having. This is going to amuse him because he likes success. He loves success in the world of Caesar. He thinks that what I do, well, he would not say it's insane. He just doesn't understand it. He says, I have one thing to do in the world of Caesar. We are a large family, but I have no children of my own. I'm the one that's a mule. He says, all you fellows seem to be bulls, but I am a mule. I have no children, so I have to make it in the event you fellows will need it. Well, we aren't going to need it, but he keeps on making it, so he enjoys money. He enjoys making it. He actually enjoys doing things in a big way. He thinks in a big way, and he does it by inner conversations. And he started, I'd say, behind the 8 ball when as a poor white family in Little Barbados, or in any of the islands for that matter, because the white man who has it ignores the white man who hasn't anything. A white man in Barbados has to put on shoes. A Negro in Barbados can go without shoes. He can go without a jacket, and they will tolerate that, but they will not tolerate that from a poor, poor white man. So I know what I talk about. We are as poor as they come. Today, no one tops them in Barbados regarding money, and they all come to him for advice. Those who thought they had it, they come to Victor. They don't venture anything, not even the government, until they come to Victor. They value his opinion. He gets a piece of it all. If they want my advice, I'll take a piece of their stock. Give me a block of stock and you'll get my advice. So he has a stock here, stock there, stock everywhere. And so that's Victor. He loves it. That's a great way to sell advice. Give me stock in your company. I tell him that I do my work alone and I love it. I love this as he loves making money. Fortunately for me, I don't have to go to him for advice. That's a little Neville joke there. Hey, Layla, how's it going? Even when they continue complaining about their circumstances, just assume that you already have your desire. The outcome is done and working in their favor. This is what I'm doing with my mother right now. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's just persistence. You just have to keep it going and not be swayed. I mean, the point is, when it comes to these inner conversations, like, let's say, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Well, with a job. And so, let's say your friend wants a new job. And so the inner conversation that you've constructed is them being, like, they've been in the job for a couple months and they're like, this is really my dream job. I love this job. Like, I can't believe it. Like, I'm making so much money. I love my coworkers. I love the work. Like, it's awesome. You know, you're hearing them tell you that. And you're like, that's great, dude. That's awesome. And so that's the inner conversation that you held. Well, you know, a week passes by and they call you up and they're going on and on about how, oh man, I've been on I swear I've been on 50 interviews, and this one place I thought I was going to get the job, and they made me go through 10 interviews, and, you know, like I thought I was going to get it, but they just called and said I didn't. All of this nonsense. All of this fucking nonsense. And after that conversation ends, you're tempted to keep arguing with them, to keep hearing what they just told you and being like, yeah, I know it's going to, you know, whatever you would say, like, yeah, and that sucks. Like, I know that's gonna work out. Instead of doing that, dwelling that, staying stuck in this state of being like, oh, my friend has to keep going on all these interviews. That really sucks for them. Instead, go back to hearing that conversation that you initially constructed, where they're like, I love my job. Like, this is the best job I've ever had. To go back to that conversation instead on, whatever thing. But it seems like Neville was talking about how he had developed enough discipline to where he didn't even need to do that anymore. Like, if somebody who hadn't had their manifestation yet tried to come to him and say, like, well, where is it? You told me to do it and I did it, but I don't see any result yet. Like, he would just ignore them. And I guess he wouldn't bother to do the imaginal act yet. Though there is one guy he talked about where he said you do it and you keep doing it. I think you have to do it 77 times 7. You do it that many times. Some friend of his would call him all the time with problems. And every time he would hear the good thing for the person. So I guess it depends on how you feel about it. Like, what is easier for you to stay locked into that inner conversation with them where they have what they want. Okay. So here I spoke of two men tonight, my father and my brother, and they do it by inner conversations. But the Bible supports it. If the Bible did not support it, I wouldn't tell you. But the Bible supports what they're doing. How they found it, I do not know. My father, the only book he ever read was the Bible. I wonder if he got it when he read it. When I wrote my first book, Your Faith is Your Fortune, I sent the first copy off the press to my father and my mother. When I wrote the inscription, it said, if there is such a thing as reincarnation, and I have to come back to this world again, I would ask for nothing greater than to have you two as my parents. Oh, that's so sweet. So Daddy, because of that inscription, started to look at the book. It has 26 chapters, and each chapter begins with a quote from the Bible. So he closed the book. When I went home a few years later, I asked, Daddy, did you read my book? He said, oh, why should I? You took 26 little verses from the scripture and wrote a book of 200 pages. I know the 26 verses, so that's how he said it. Why should I read it? I know those verses, and it's the one book he always read. Perhaps he did find it. I do not know. Well, I mean, I think obviously he did, Neville. Come on. We are told to alter our old conversations, and if we do it, he will show us the salvation of God. Blake, whom I'm always quoting in his book Jerusalem, he says, oh, what have I said? What have I done? Oh, all-powerful human words. You realize that you cannot pull them back. So you said them. And how are you going to pull them back? Now, tonight, it shouldn't take you long if you know it's true, and I know it's true, to change the entire world if you put on a new record. And you can easily put on the new record. Just what would it be like if it were true? And if it were true, would anyone know? Yes, my wife would know it first. My daughter would know it, and then my circle would widen. Then my circle of friends would know it. Well, start with the one you know best first. My wife would know it. I share all things with her, and then my daughter would know it. So I carry on a conversation. First with my wife, and then with my daughter, Vicky. And then try to make it a lasting conversation so that it becomes a habit. Instead of going back into the negative, make it a positive statement. And try to make it so natural in yourself that it's easy to pick up the record and put it on. And see how it works in your world. It doesn't cost you anything. It costs nothing to do it. And this is what Scripture teaches. And it cannot but return to you if you know who you are. And I'm trying to convince everyone that I reach that they are God. It's a shock to them because they've been told they're little worms. You aren't a little worm. You are God wearing a garment of flesh for educated purposes. But you are God. You have his name, and he will not give his name to another. But he puts you through the furnaces of affliction to receive his name. You are going through the furnaces. On that topic, we'll eventually do that which already has been, which addresses all of this segment, which is essentially the purpose of life. So I don't want to delve too much into that here because we'll have a whole stream about that. As Blake says in the statement, speaking of those who call God a non-existent being, he calls them fools, as we are told in the psalm. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. But Blake calls the fools Babel. Babel says, there is no God or son of God, that thou, O human imagination, O divine body, are all a delusion. But I know thee, O Lord, when thou arisest upon my weary eyes. even in this dungeon and this iron mill, thou also sufferest with me, though I behold thee not. When it comes to Jerusalem, I've said last time, like, I don't know if we're going to do Jerusalem. I also don't know if I would read it otherwise than to do it here. But I know Blake is so dense, like a lot of the epic poets, like it would be well beyond my current state to do Jerusalem in a competent way. But we might eventually do it. We'll see. We are going to do some other shorter Blake poems eventually. You cannot see your imagination. He equates human imagination with the divine body of the Lord and the Lord. Is that right? And he equates human imagination with the divine body of the Lord. It might be in the Lord itself. I'm not sure. These three are one in the eyes of Blake in this marvelous poem, Jerusalem. So I think it's leaving something out here. It's probably body of the Lord and two other things. Well, no, because human imagination and then two aspects of the Lord. But maybe it is body of the Lord and the Lord itself. Something like that. So you can't see imagination, you see the fruits of imagination. So no one has ever seen God because you are the reality called imagination. And you don't see imagination, but you see the evidence. You see the fruit of it. And the divine voice answers, "Fear not. Lo, I am with you always, even to the ends of time. Only believe in me, that I have the power to raise from death thy brother who sleeps in Albion." So who is the brother? You are the brother, I am the brother. Humanity is Albion. And then, buried in humanity is the Lord Jesus Christ. And this one is speaking, saying, "I have power to raise from the dead thy brother who sleeps in Albion." But he has not for one moment denied the human imagination as the Lord. They are equated. They are all one. You have the Lord always with you. You can't take imagination and put it out there. Wherever you go, you're always imagining. You cannot leave the Lord behind you. You cannot sit here and wish imagination away as you can the body. I can stand here and assume that I am at the end of the room and imagine that I am looking at this one. But where am I? I am in imagination. I can look at the body as something that I have put away for a while. I return to it, but I can't put away imagination. I cannot get away from the Lord, because, being all imagination, I must be wherever he is in imagination. So if I now, in imagination, feel things as I desire them to be, that's the Lord doing it. And because all things are possible to the Lord, I must believe in me. I must believe it is the Lord doing it, as we are all told in the last words of David. Now these are the last words of David. "The Lord is upon me, his word is upon my tongue." Then he discovers that that's why he's victorious. He never lost a battle. When the giant put on the armor and he had the sword, and he was a giant, and little David comes out with only 5 feathers, they were not stones. Apparently, I guess David slayed Goliath with feathers and not stones. I didn't know that. He took 5. Well, 5 is the number of grace. And grace is God's gift of himself to man. What other armor does he need other than the gift of God? So he goes on with that. What giant could stand before him when all he needs is the grace of God? So he goes and the giant comes down. So he realizes then that everything he did was done because he went in the grace of God. So wherever you are, if you're in a bar, that's a holy place. Why? Because you are there. If you go into any place that the world would judge harshly, it is holy because you were there. And you can sit in any place in the world. You don't have to go into a church. You can sit at home in any room, sit in the garden, sit any place in this world, and just carry on a conversation with yourself. This controlled dialogue. This may turn out one day to be the most fruitful conversation you've ever had. So we all need something tonight. We all do. Even those who have a billion. They still want more, and I wouldn't judge them harshly. They want it. Let them have it. If they want more, because as Blake said, more and more is the cry of the fool, all or nothing. There is no natural religion. And I have covered the 50th chapter of Psalms tonight. And that's the chapter. You read it carefully. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, because the world is mine and all within it. The cattle on 1,000 hills are mine. But who is speaking? Asaph is speaking, and Asaph means to gather together. He has been recalled. He records all the history of Israel. From the famous 78th Psalm, he says, I will open my mouth in a parable and utter dark sayings from of old. And then he records the entire history of Israel and how, in spite of all the great things the Lord did, Israel went astray to false gods. Then we come to the end, and David appears. The Lord awoke as out of sleep, like a man from strong drink, and he appoints David. But here is the entire history in a parable. The whole history of Israel is a parable. It is a story told as if it were true, leaving the one who hears it to discover its fictitious nature and then extract its meaning. So the entire history of Israel, as recorded in Scripture, is not secular history, but it is divine history. You have to find out what it means behind that story. And when you find out, it is the most thrilling thing in the world. It's all about you. As we are told in the 40th Psalm, in the volume of the book, it is all about me. I have not restrained my lips. I screamed it from the housetops when I discovered the whole thing was about me. More, more is the cry of a mistaken soul. Less than all cannot satisfy man. Okay, and that quote might have been erroneously put in here twice. Unless it's just like a callback to it. The whole book is about you. It's all about you, but it is adumbrated. By the way, I did have to look up adumbration because I forgot what it means. It means foreshadowing. The whole thing is an adumbration. Now when we come to the New Testament, it takes on a cubic reality. The Old is a rough sketch, but the New Testament takes on a cubic reality, and it all takes place within you, the individual. Then you'll realize the whole thing is all about you, everything in the Bible. It is not understood in the Old Testament because that is a foreshadowing. It is told in a not altogether conclusive or immediately evident way. When we come into the New Testament, and he tells it's all about the individual, that's not what they were looking for. They were looking for an external savior, one who would come and destroy physical enemy of Israel. So that's not it. He comes from within. And this is what was meant in the very beginning of days. He comes to us as one unknown, but one who in the most mysterious manner lets the individual experience who he is. And when you experience it as yourself. You are the one spoken of. Now, if all things are possible to him, remember now, you are the one spoken of in Scripture. And if what I have quoted earlier tonight can be put to the test and proven in the testing, don't hesitate to do it. You can speak. You have the two gifts spoken of by Hermes, and we are told that no mortal creature has it but man. These are the gifts of mind and speech. So if you use them rightly, you will differ in nothing from the gods. And when you drop off the body and you quit it, these will be your guides. They will lead you into the troop of the gods and into the souls of those who have attained to bliss. You will have the same mind. You will be using mind and you will be using speech. So you will find all through Scripture the words, and the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. The word of the Lord came unto Ezekiel. So he has all of these sites where the word of the Lord came unto is referenced. And these are the word of the Lord, and you are the ones spoken of. So tonight, in a simple way, this is what I would do. I would be brutally frank with myself and don't modify it. If there is no restraint on what God offers, and you have a desire, nothing is impossible to God. So know exactly what you want, and be honest with yourself. Now, if it were true, what would it feel like? And if it were true, could I restrain the impulse to talk about it? No, I couldn't. I would have to tell it. And we are told in Jeremiah, if I say I will not mention him or speak any more in his name, there is in my heart, as it were, a burning fire, shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in, and I cannot. Well, do it. He has to talk about it when he discovers a principle that works and proves itself in performance. Now, don't modify your objective. You know what you want? Well, that's it. Now, what would the feeling be like? And what would I say? And to whom would I say it? Well, carry on that conversation from the premise of the wish fulfilled and try to keep it until it's natural, until it feels natural. When it takes on the tones of reality and the feeling of naturalness, you've got it. The thing is working now. You can play it over and over as you play a nice record. If you like good music, you never tire of listening to it. You play it every day and several times a day and never tire of good music. If you appreciate it, you get tired of the bebop, but how could you ever tire of the beautiful classical pieces? I know I don't, so I can listen to them every day, and I do when I'm at home. We turn our radio to a certain station, and it's 24 hours of classical music, KFAC, with very little advertising and a small little 3-minute newscast on the hour. And then throughout the hour, unbroken hour, wonderful music. Piano between 9 and 10, the Beethovens and the Brahms in the box for 1 solid hour. I just enjoy it, feast upon it. Well, you can take a record, your own record, and do that, and let it come back into this world bearing fruit. One second, I'm going to take a little drink here. And obviously everyone should do what he's encouraged you to do here. To pick that whatever goal you have, whatever thing you want, that as far as you know hasn't expressed itself yet. Assume that it has already happened, and now talk to people about it. Talk to your best friend, talk to your parents, talk to your partner if you already have a partner. Talk to your kids if you have kids. Whoever you would tell that news to, start telling them about it. Start talking about it like it's already happened. Mentally, in your own mind. And then throughout the day, when you start noticing, it hasn't happened yet, go back to that conversation. So if you want to, let's go with one that a lot of people, as far as I know, really want, besides money. A lot of people want to be married or to be with someone, and a lot of times they already have someone in mind. They call it a specific person in the community, right? So a lot of people want to marry a specific person. Well, after you are married to them, you're going to talk to people about it, right? You're going to talk to your parents about, your parents, they've been there, right? So let's assume that, someone who's been at your wedding, you're talking to them 2 months later, and they're telling you, I really just loved your wedding. I had the best time at it. I'm so happy for you. How are things going? And you say, my relationship is just fantastic. I'm so happily married. Our relationship couldn't be better. Things like that. Like it's pretty simple. And if you really know that you want a long-term commitment with somebody, you could go to an anniversary a couple years in the future, and you just got home from a anniversary dinner, and your best friend calls you, and you're just saying, yeah, I just got back from dinner. Tonight was our 3-year anniversary, and I don't know how, but our marriage somehow seems to get better every single day. And your friend says, wow, that's just fantastic. Like, I remember when I was at your wedding, we had such the best time in the world. Simple stuff. And then put it to how you would talk about it and how your friend would talk about it, or whoever other person you're going to bring into this conversation. When it comes to a job, when you get a job that you like and you're making the money you want to make and you're really fulfilled and satisfied, you have all those conversations with your friends. Even if they live in other states, that's generally my experience. I still see my friends when they come back into town for holidays, and we usually go to lunch, or we probably won't be doing that now until COVID stuff gets straightened out. But we'll have some kind of meet up, And at that point, we're talking about what's going on in our life. So if you have that same experience, put yourself in one of those conversations, talking about how you have this job you want, it's going great, you're making the amount of money you want, you're enjoying your work every day, you've never been more fulfilled with what you're doing in your career, and it's just great. Whatever things you want, you could talk to them about your marriage, because maybe this is a friend who couldn't make it to the wedding, though be careful with that, because if you really want them to be there, you might manifest them not coming when otherwise they could have come. But if this is someone you're like, yeah, they're a good friend, but they wouldn't necessarily be at my wedding, you can imagine having that conversation with them, telling them about your wedding. Whatever thing you set your heart on that you really desire, do this with it. Just pick one thing, because I know it's so easy to feel overwhelmed, right? But pick one thing and do it. And find a conversation you really enjoy with someone that you really do love, that you know would be happy for you. And have that conversation as often as possible. Whenever you think of this thing, go back to that conversation and see how that pulls you out of whatever sense of lack that you've accidentally fallen into. Okay, so here he's going to talk about the promise. The promise is very different to what we've been talking about all today, because all today we've been talking about the law. The promise is, well, let's just hear Neville's much more eloquent description of the promise than any I will ever tell you. So I do hope you will take me seriously. You haven't a thing to lose and all to gain. That's why you are here, and that's why I've been sent to tell you. There is a law and there is a promise. The promise is going to come regardless, but while you are waiting for the promise, you can make life more comfortable with the use of the law, because the law must be operated. We are the operant power. It will not operate itself, but the promise is coming. You can't stop the promise. The promise is that you are going to be God. That's the promise. You're going to wake up one day and know that you are God. And all the symbolism that confirms it will stand before you. And then you'll know who you are. His Son will call you Father. And you will know that you are God. And when His only Son calls you Father, you will know that He is your Son. And He'll know that you're His Father. So that promise is coming. But while you wait for the promise, take the law and use it. I quoted very much this night on the law, which is the inner conversations. Use your inner conversations, because if you do, you will have the salvation of God. And because your former conversations were related to your old nature, and He tells you to put it off, you can only put off the old nature by putting off the old conversations, because they're related. The former conversations were producing the old nature. And if the nature is the principle upon which man depends for sameness of form and transmitted life, the same form is going to be transmitted until you change the former conversations. When you put on a new record, the new conversations, you're going to change your world. And people will meet you and wonder what has happened to you. Why? Now he is moving in the most marvelous manner. Things are just going perfectly for him. Why? He changed his nature. How did he do it? He changed his inner conversations. But do you know there are people? My mind goes back now to the last war, World War II, and this young man, he's going to talk about the FDR story, World War II, and this young man, a fine chap, an only child, he told me quite innocently that he so hated Roosevelt that in the morning while he was shaving, he told him off. He told him exactly what he thought of him, bawled him out. I said, why do you do it? Don't you know you're only hurting yourself? He said, I know it, but if you didn't know what a thrill I get out of it, he wouldn't change it. He so despised the man. He didn't even know Roosevelt. He didn't know any member of the family, but he simply disliked him. And inwardly, not on Mr. Roosevelt, it worked on him. And he knew what he was doing. If he didn't know, that's one thing. But to know it and not to do it, that is just the opposite. Well, that's what he did. He said, by Neville, the shows on Broadway today are $10 a seat. There is no show on Broadway that could give me the thrill of those 15 minutes in the morning when I shave. He just simply delighted in telling off somebody that he didn't even know. And if he thought for one moment he shouldn't do it, he said, well, let me finish the sentence anyway. Well, people do that. They know they're doing the wrong thing, and yet they've got to complete the sentence. It's a stupid thing, and I'm totally guilty of it too. So I ask you to try it, but work it radically. Well, there he's just given the example of a very unproductive inner conversation. And it's really an old man behavior that no one should really be engaging with. It's not gonna produce anything great in your world except an argument with that person if they are someone you know. So I ask you to try it, but work it radically and go to the very root and put on the new record. You can do it. I warned you earlier, it's not the easiest thing in the world because we are all creatures of habit. But when you catch yourself going back to the old record, just put on the new record again, and the new one becomes just as easy to play and as natural to play as the old one is now. Now, let us go into the silence. Okay, and then here he just has some general some general business to attend to. All right, so this is the question segment. And a lady asked, oh, by the way, when you have questions about manifesting, eventually I'll do a little opening segment about questions so that I can post my own video about it on YouTube and put that on my site and use that for when people have questions. Most of your questions about manifesting have been answered directly by Neville. Furthermore, you have infinite intelligence with you at all times, so you always have access to those answers. But if you're not used to yet manifesting answers to questions, it's really easy to Google it and find that Neville already answered it. A lot of the most common questions are answered in the Q&A segment of 5 lessons. Like if you've just found manifesting and you manifested a couple things, but you're like, well, how does this work? How does that work? Blah, blah, blah. All that stuff. Go read the Q&A of 5 lessons. I guarantee like your top 5 questions are answered there. Like no doubt. Your top questions are answered in that. And this is a really cool common question. How can I know the difference between if I am daydreaming or if I have a real inner conversation? And Neville says, well, my dear, try it. You start with a daydream anyway. The dress you're wearing had first to be imagined. People call all imagination a dream. It first was only imagined before it became what the world calls a fact. What is now known as something proven was first only imagined. The building we are in here, all the buildings in the city were only imagined. And all the workers that seem to be the active instruments to put them up, they are the unconscious instruments of men who only dreamed. The architects, they had their blueprint in their dream. And the workmen, they come out, all right, they are doing their job, they seem so active, but they're simply the unconscious instruments of those men of imagination. You go into battle, thousands are falling. They are the unconscious instruments of the men who plot the war. Let me see if there's any other questions. No, I think it just moves to the next one, yeah. My personal answer to that, so when he says here you start with a daydream anyway, Neville will address in the books and other lectures the idea between construction and occupancy. So like he says that specifically one of the reasons for failure is what he calls perpetual construction and delayed occupancy. So to give a really great concrete example of that, and I'm doing it, like if say you want to renovate your house and you're constantly thinking about, well, I could do that, I could try that, and looking at all different stuff on the internet and catalogs that you might try in your renovation and trying to visualize it and thinking about it. And you could do this for years, I have done, but you never at one point assume I'm in my new totally renovated house. Like you never really relax into that scene and walk around it like it's yours now. Like you're already there. Like the renovation's already done. You never do that. You're always changing it around and finding new things. And maybe some of them might accidentally, like you might end up manifesting doing those little side projects in the meanwhile. But you never really occupy what it would be like to walk around the totally renovated house. Same thing you could do. You could definitely do this with a job or a relationship too. Like you could spend so much time thinking about all the nice things you could do together, but never for 1 second decide that you are the person who now has this relationship and now does these things with this specific partner. Like you could just delay that forever. Same with your prosperity. Like you could daydream about having lots of money, but never truly identify with being a wealthy person and never really change your thoughts. Never have these inner conversations with other people where you tell them how well you're doing. So that's the difference that he's alluding to now. But the thing that I've experienced personally is that I have had daydreams manifest, which is why now I try to be really careful with all my thoughts, though I'm far from 1,000% on it, daydreams definitely do manifest in my experience. And the more you pay attention to your thoughts, you're going to notice that too. That's why whenever you notice you're having one of these conversations with a friend or with a family member mentally about what's going on in your life, start controlling it. Start bringing it putting it into the future putting it in the place where you've already got what you want and you're talking to them from that perspective. You're not talking to them about you're still doing job interviews and you're still broke and all of that. You're talking to them about your new job and how much you love it or how much money you have coming in. And when it comes to your relationship, you're not talking about they're not talking to me or, whatever other relationship complaints you have. No, you're talking about things are going great between us. Oh my God, he or she or they are so sweet to me all the time. We're so in love. You're talking about that stuff. Just whenever you catch yourself mentally having those conversations, shift it to a conversation that you want to have. And so the practical exercises for this week is do this. Come on, do it. What's stopping you? Pick one thing and do it. And then the other exercise, let me pop it into... let's go back to the chatting room right now. The other exercise I've got, piggybacking off the identify one bad thought and switch it exercise, is to identify, and this might be a little bit of a painful experience, identify a deeper belief you've had for a long time, maybe since childhood, but a couple decades, something that is one of these foundational beliefs that is a damaging belief. I get to give an example. Let's say like the only way you can get ahead is hard work, and even that may not work out. So like at that point you're guaranteeing yourself suffering, and you're not guaranteeing yourself success. That's a really damaging belief. Once you've identified that belief, pick something you would prefer. If we're gonna pick that damaging belief, you would say, well, success comes to me super easily. Things just, I don't even have to work hard and success just comes to me automatically. That would be a great counter belief. And you could figure out the way that you would like to hear that and think about that. And start thinking about that. Just start having that thought randomly throughout the day. Now that process of identifying what that sort of damaging belief you've had for a long time, that might be a little bit painful. And the more you do this, the more you realize how much you've really limited your own good and really limited the lives, other people's lives. And so it is kind of painful because you have to acknowledge that you put yourself and other people through a lot of totally unnecessary suffering. But the salvation is that you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to give into that anymore. You don't have to be a victim to that anymore. And overall, you don't have to be a victim. So if you're somebody out there that has a victim mindset and you've got like a whole bunch of beliefs supporting that, like if you think like no matter what I do, I can never get ahead. Oh my God, what an awful belief. And you know how much like heartache that's creating for you? You need to let go of that. And by let go of that, I just mean just identify a better thought and start thinking it. Don't even have an expectation that it's going to manifest. Like just think that thought. The more you think it, the more it's going to create in your world. Eventually, you are going to notice. Thank you, Fantastical Emu, for the follow. Eventually, you are going to notice a change in your outer world. And I also got to test my follower alerts here. That's pretty great. If they doubled, sorry, that'll be fixed pretty soon because I'm getting new speakers. So that should be not an issue next stream. If anybody has any questions right now or any comments or whatever, anything else you want to talk about, we'll get into that. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap this up. I still haven't decided which lecture. Oh, you like the follow alert? Thank you. Yeah, I've got pretty cool ones for all of the different ones. Actually, okay, wait. I can show you all a test of them. I think I can. That's for subscriptions, but I don't have subscriptions set up yet because I need to be an affiliate first. But once I have subscriptions and people can subscribe, they'll get to see that.
This is the test.
And then if someone hosts the channel, that'll pop up. This one, I don't know if it's going to sound right. I'm going to get a better clip.
I know you got money. Give me some. This is a test bit alert.
That's for when people donate bits, and then if people donate money directly, That one I need to get another.
This is a test donation for $1.
I'm gonna get another sound clip for that. I'm gonna get. I'm gonna record some when Reverend Ike, if anyone knows Reverend Ike, when he says money, the way he says it's really funny. And yeah, the follow on to show again is that the eye. I specifically picked that out because it's got the eye, and then it's got the birds integrated in it too, and then a lot of a lot of foliage going on. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for showing up, for listening. I mean, please try those exercises. I mean, you're the only one that's not going to benefit by being lazy and not doing it, or saying this is bullshit and not doing it. And if you're one of the people who I know, who I talk to, who has manifested a ton of stuff, yo, look, this is your moment to just pick one thing today. Pick one thing today. Pick one conversation you're going to have today. Pick one belief you're going to have today. All like we can get so overwhelmed and feeling like there's so much you need to do. Well, tonight, just pick the one thing to have the inner conversation about. And do your best to keep track of your thoughts throughout the rest of the night and just keep your mind focused on good things, But that's the point, is narrow it down tonight. Just have the one conversation tonight. Identify the one belief tonight. You don't have to go identifying 50, because I know we've all done that. And and it just leads to feeling like there's too much to do. And have the one conversation tonight. Don't have the 5 conversations about the 5 big things you want. Just pick the one. And have the conversation that brings you the most personal joy. All right, everybody. Thanks very much.